The air hung heavy in the forgotten hangar, thick with the ghosts of aviation history and the sharp tang of oil and old dreams. Dust motes, like tiny stars, danced in the anemic shafts of sunlight that pierced the grimy windows, illuminating the weathered hands of Elias Vance. His fingers, calloused from decades spent coaxing life from cold steel, meticulously polished a single, worn piston. Each stroke was a testament to a bygone era, a quiet defiance against the relentless march of progress. Outside, a chorus of dismissive laughter echoed, sharp and cruel, cutting through the hangar's solemn quiet. It was followed by the arrogant, high-pitched whine of a new jet engine, a sound that sliced through the very air Elias breathed, mocking his devotion. Elias looked up, his gaze distant, but a flicker of something unyielding, a stubborn, burning defiance, ignited in his tired eyes. His project, a P-51 Mustang, sat shrouded beneath a heavy canvas tarp, a sleeping silver beast whose old engine was the constant subject of ridicule from a new guard. In an age obsessed with the sleek, raw power of jet propulsion, Elias Vance was an anachronism. They called him a relic, a man clinging to the past, a fool for believing a piston engine could ever compete with the future. But for Elias, his passion was more than just a hobby. It was a burden, a conviction forged in the roar of radial engines and the scent of high-octane fuel. It was his shield against a world that had moved on. Yet, within the oil-stained walls of his sanctuary, Elias harbored an impossible dream. He wasn't merely attempting to build a faster plane. He was striving to shatter the very limits of what was thought possible. The ultimate challenge loomed. The Messerschmitt Me 262, the undisputed pinnacle of jet technology, a symbol of speed, innovation, and a relentless future. Elias wasn't just aiming to beat a machine. He was fighting to redefine the very essence of flight, to prove that the human spirit, coupled with unparalleled ingenuity, could outpace raw, unthinking power. He would silence the sneers, once and for all, or he would fall trying. His solitary world was confined to the four corrugated steel walls of that hangar. Night bled into day, and seasons changed outside the grease-smeared windows. But inside, time was measured only by the torque of a wrench and the slow, agonizing progress of his creation. His workshop was a cathedral of obsession, littered with schematics that covered every surface like sacred texts. They were not the original P-51 blueprints. They were desecrations, covered in his frantic, spidery handwriting, with impossible calculations scribbled in the margins. Here, in this sanctuary of controlled chaos, Elias was not a relic. He was a high priest of an almost forgotten faith. The heart of his religion lay on a reinforced engine stand, a monstrous assembly of steel and wire that bore only a passing resemblance to the Packard V. 1650 Merlin it had once been. This was his old engine, but it wasn't old. It was timeless, a beast reborn. He had re-engineered it from the crankshaft out, a Frankenstein's monster of custom-forged pistons, a radical dual-stage supercharger system he designed in a fever dream, and an experimental fuel injection system that officials had deemed too volatile, too dangerous for any sane pilot. Each component was a heresy against conventional aviation engineering. The engine wasn't just a machine. It was a beating metallic heart, waiting for the command to pump fire through the veins of the sleeping dragon that was his Mustang. The pressure from the outside world was a constant, grinding force. It came in the form of polite but firm letters from officials, denying his requests for classified alloys and high-grade fuel. It came from former colleagues who had stopped by, their faces a mixture of pity and concern. "Elias, give it up," one had said, his voice echoing in the vast emptiness of the hangar. The age of the propeller is over. You're chasing a ghost. They would look at his monstrous engine, shake their heads, and leave him alone in the growing shadows, their skepticism hanging in the air long after they were gone. The public, fed stories by a press enamored with the sleek promise of the jet age, saw him as a crackpot, a local eccentric building a death trap. Each dismissal, every condescending smile and whispered doubt became fuel. He worked with a feverish intensity, his hands often bleeding from slipped wrenches and sharp metal edges, the pain a distant, unimportant sensation. But the weight of it all pressed down on him in the quiet hours before dawn, when the coffee ran cold and the sheer audacity of his goal seemed insurmountable. He wasn't just fighting physics. He was fighting an entire era's perception of the future. Failure wouldn't just mean a broken machine. It would mean public humiliation, the final, crushing validation of every skeptic who had ever called him a fool. It would mean the end of a legacy he was trying to build not for fame, but for the simple, profound belief that a man's vision should not be limited by the horizon others see. The sneers were the engine of his defiance, but the fear of proving them right was a cold, heavy anchor in his soul. But the anchor, though heavy, was no match for the prevailing wind of his conviction. Day by day, hour by hour, the P-51 Mustang began to shed its shroud of neglect. Elias meticulously peeled back the tarp, revealing not a relic, but a predator awakening. It was no longer just airframe number 44 to 73,872. It was a loyal steed, forged in the fires of Elias's belief, its aluminum skin now gleaming with a fresh, almost predatory sheen. Every rivet had been inspected, every panel smoothed, every line sharpened by his relentless hands. The familiar olive drab of its past was replaced by stark, polished silver, reflecting the harsh fluorescent light of the hangar like a mirror. It looked less like a warbird and more like a rocket, a silent promise of impossible speed. The meticulous assembly was a dance of obsession. Elias moved with a practiced grace, his movements economical, precise. He spent weeks on the landing gear alone, reinforcing struts, upgrading hydraulics, knowing that what he planned would put immense stress on every component. The cockpit, once a tangle of worn instruments, was now a minimalist masterpiece. Old dials were replaced with custom-fabricated gauges, their needles poised for readings that had never been seen in a propeller plane. Every switch, every lever, felt new, crisp, ready for action. He installed a reinforced canopy, thicker than standard, designed to withstand unimaginable air pressure, a silent acknowledgement of the speeds he intended to achieve. He wasn't just assembling parts. He was weaving a tapestry of possibility, each thread a testament to his singular vision. The engine, his monstrous creation, was finally mounted, bolted into place with a symphony of precise clicks and grunts. It settled into the airframe like a beast finding its lair, its custom exhaust manifolds snaking back like a dragon's throat. When he connected the fuel lines, a faint scent of high-octane aviation fuel, sweeter than any perfume, filled the hangar. It was the scent of life, of potential, of a dream on the verge of taking flight. Elias worked through countless nights, fueled by stale coffee and an unshakable belief. He would often fall asleep on a cot beside the plane, only to wake with a jolt, a new idea sparking in his mind, sending him back to work with renewed vigor. His hands, perpetually stained with grease and oil, were the instruments of his will, transforming raw materials into a living machine. Then came the ground tests, a series of nerve-wracking trials that stretched his patience and tested his resolve. The first time he fired up the re-engineered Merlin, the roar was unlike anything heard before. It wasn't the familiar, comforting growl of a P-51. It was a deeper, angrier snarl, a sound that vibrated through the concrete floor and rattled the very bones of the hangar. The prop blur was a silver disc, a shimmering portal to another dimension. But with that raw power came problems. The engine ran too hot, the vibrations threatened to tear the airframe apart, and the experimental fuel system often sputtered, threatening to flame out at critical moments. Each setback was a punch to the gut, a cold reminder of the impossible odds. He spent days, then weeks, recalibrating, retuning, strengthening. He replaced entire sections of wiring, remachined components that warped under stress, and redesigned cooling ducts until his eyes burned from exhaustion. One day, during a high-speed taxi test, a tire blew out, sending the Mustang skidding precariously close to the edge of the runway. Elias wrestled the controls, bringing the screaming machine to a halt just feet from a ditch. He emerged from the cockpit, trembling, but not from fear. It was the rage of a craftsman whose masterpiece had almost been destroyed by a flaw. He spent the next 3 days personally redesigning the landing gear reinforcement, meticulously overseeing the replacement of every wheel and tire. These crushing setbacks, however, were always followed by small, agonizingly slow victories. A stable idle, a flawless high-speed run down the runway. A perfectly executed, albeit brief, hop in the air, barely clearing the tarmac before settling back down. Each successful test flight, no matter how minor, was a whisper of hope, a defiant murmur against the deafening roar of doubt that still echoed from the outside world. The first true flight was a moment suspended in time. Elias, strapped into the cockpit, felt the familiar thrum of the engine, but intensified, vibrating through his very core. He taxied the silver beast onto the runway, the sun glinting off its polished surfaces. With a deep breath, he pushed the throttle forward. The roar was deafening, primal, a sound that seemed to rip the air itself. The P-51 surged, gathering speed with an almost violent eagerness. The tail lifted, the runway blurred, and then, with a gentle heave, the aircraft became airborne. It climbed like a rocket, faster, steeper than any P-51 had a right to. Elias felt a surge of pure exhilaration, a sensation that wiped away years of skepticism and lonely toil. He put the plane through its paces, pushing it, testing its limits, feeling the raw power thrumming beneath him. The control surfaces responded with crisp authority, the airframe holding true despite the unprecedented stresses. He pushed the throttle further, watching the airspeed indicator climb past numbers he'd only dreamed of. The world below became a blur, a canvas of greens and browns smeared by speed. He flew for an hour, a solitary silver dart against the vast blue canvas, before bringing it down for a perfect feather-light landing. When he finally cut the engine, the sudden silence was profound, broken only by the ticking of cooling metal and the rapid thumping of his own heart. He climbed out, his legs wobbly, a wide, uncharacteristic grin splitting his oil-stained face. This wasn't just a plane. It was a living extension of his will, a testament to what a man could achieve when he refused to bow to convention. The P-51, once a symbol of a dying era, was now reborn, a sleek, menacing machine ready to challenge the future. It was a dragon, finally awake, its fire contained, waiting for the ultimate command. The ultimate command arrived, not as an official decree, but as a challenge whispered on the wind, amplified by the sneers of the establishment. The day of the showdown dawned under a sky the color of cold steel, reflecting the tension that hung heavy over the desolate airbase. Word had spread like wildfire through the underground network of aviation enthusiasts and skeptics alike. A crowd, a strange mix of morbid curiosity and faint, almost desperate hope, gathered behind makeshift barricades. They were there to witness either the spectacular failure of an old fool or the impossible triumph of a forgotten dream. Across the tarmac, sleek and predatory, sat the Messerschmitt Me 262. Its twin-jet engines, dark and ominous, were the epitome of modern might, a symbol of the future that had left propeller planes in the dust. Its pilot, a young, arrogant ace named Captain Reinhardt, was a poster boy for the new era, his confident smirk a constant jab at Elias Vance. Reinhardt, lounging in his cockpit, barely spared a glance for the anachronism parked hundreds of yards away. He was there for a formality, a public spectacle meant to definitively close the book on piston-driven air superiority. Then, from the old, familiar hangar, emerged Elias Vance. He wasn't a hero striding into battle. He was a craftsman walking to his forge. His movements were slow, deliberate, a quiet defiance against the frantic energy of the crowd. He wore his usual oil-stained overalls, a worn leather cap pulled low over his brow, shielding his eyes from the harsh morning light. He carried no helmet, no fancy flight suit, just the weight of his conviction and the ghosts of every engineer who ever dared to dream beyond the blueprints. He paused beside his P-51, the silver dragon now fully unveiled. It shimmered, a polished weapon, its lines honed to a razor's edge. The custom exhaust pipes, usually hidden, were now exposed, hinting at the inferno within. The propeller, an impossible blur even at rest, seemed to hum with contained fury. Elias ran a hand over the cool metal of the fuselage, a silent communion between man and machine. He climbed into the cockpit, not with a flourish, but with the practiced ease of a man settling into his own skin. The canopy closed with a solid thunk, sealing him in his world of dials, switches, and unyielding purpose. He took a deep, steadying breath, his fingers dancing over the controls, a silent prayer to the metal beast beneath him. Then, with a flick of a switch, the engine coughed, sputtered, and then roared to life. It wasn't the refined, almost elegant whine of the jet. No, this was a primal scream, a guttural snarl that ripped through the air, shaking the very ground. It was raw, unrefined, utterly defiant, a symphony of controlled chaos that promised violence and speed. The spectators gasped, a collective intake of breath. This was no ordinary Merlin engine. This was something else entirely. The Me 262, momentarily overshadowed, now responded. Its jet engine spooled up, a high-pitched, piercing shriek that cut through the P-51's roar. Reinhardt gave a condescending wave, then taxied his jet onto the runway, its sleek form a dark arrow poised for flight. Elias, his face a mask of serene concentration, followed, the P-51's propeller carving arcs in the morning air. The air was thick with the scent of burning jet fuel and high-octane aviation gas, two eras clashing on a single strip of asphalt. The starter's flag dropped. The Me 262 surged forward, a blur of dark steel, its jet exhaust a shimmering distortion in the air. It built speed with alarming rapidity, lifting off the ground in a matter of seconds, climbing steeply, a black speck against the pale sky. It was exactly as everyone expected. Jet power was undeniable. But then, Elias pushed the throttle of his P-51 to its absolute limit. The engine howled, a banshee's shriek, a sound that tore at the fabric of reality. The customized propeller bit into the air with impossible ferocity, clawing for purchase. The P-51 didn't just accelerate, it launched. The silver blur rocketed down the runway, faster, faster, its tail wheel lifting almost instantly, its main gear leaving the ground with a violent wrench. It climbed like a rocket, a silver arrow aimed directly at the retreating jet. The initial lead of the Me-262 was undeniable, its sleek form already a quarter-mile ahead, cutting through the air with effortless grace. Reinhardt, looking back over his shoulder, probably allowed himself a small, smug smile. This was over. But then he looked again. The silver speck behind him wasn't fading. It was growing. Elias, strapped tightly into his cockpit, felt the immense G-forces press him deep into his seat. His vision tunneled, the world outside becoming a streaky canvas of blues and grays. He was pushing his P-51 beyond every perceived limit, every design specification, every rational expectation. The engine, his monstrous heart of steel, was screaming, begging for mercy, yet Elias pushed harder. The experimental fuel system pulsed, feeding the beast an impossible diet. The airframe vibrated with a terrifying intensity, threatening to shake itself apart. But Elias held it steady, his hands fused to the controls, his will of physical force guiding the machine. The gap began to close, slowly at first, then with an accelerating, terrifying momentum. The Me-262, once a distant, became a recognizable shape, its twin engines blazing. Reinhardt, now genuinely alarmed, pushed his jet to its own maximum, but it was already there. The P-51, however, was still climbing, still accelerating, a propeller-driven ghost defying physics. The crowd below, initially stunned into silence, now erupted in a roar that rivaled the engines. They saw it. They saw the impossible. The P-51, a relic, was gaining on the future. Elias's P-51, a blur of silver, surged forward, its propeller a shimmering disk of defiance. The world outside the canopy was a maelstrom of speed and sound. The airspeed indicator climbed past 600 miles per hour, then 650. It touched 700. Elias gritted his teeth, his jaw aching, his eyes fixed on the retreating jet. He poured every ounce of his being into the machine, coaxing, demanding, willing it to go faster. The engine shrieked its protest, but obeyed. Then, the unbelievable happened. With a final, guttural scream from its re-engineered Merlin, Elias's P-51 Mustang hit an astonishing 720 miles per hour. The world blurred into a single, unbroken streak. The world blurred into a single, unbroken streak. The P-51, a silver projectile defying every law of aerodynamics, didn't just match the jet, it consumed the distance between them. Captain Reinhardt, his smug confidence replaced by a stark, chilling disbelief, watched in horror as the propeller plane, a relic from a bygone war, filled his rearview mirror. He pushed the throttles of his Me-262 to their absolute stops, the twin engines screaming in protest, but there was nothing left to give. He was already at his maximum, his cutting-edge jet already at its peak. Yet, the P-51 was still accelerating, a hungry shark in pursuit. Then it happened. With a surge that felt less like flight and more like a tear in the fabric of reality, Elias's Mustang didn't just draw abreast. It overtook the Me-262. For a fleeting, impossible second, their canopies were side by side. Reinhardt, his face pale and contorted in a mask of pure shock, stared across at Elias. He expected to see a madman, a desperate fool. Instead, he saw a man utterly calm, his eyes fixed forward, a quiet, almost serene determination etched into his oil-stained features. There was no triumph, no gloating, just focus. Then, the P-51 pulled ahead, a silver bullet disappearing into the horizon. The jet pilot watched, stunned, as the prop washed from the old plane buffeted his sleek modern fighter, a physical manifestation of his defeat. He saw the P-51's unique exhaust pipes, glowing red-hot, spitting fire like a dragon's breath as it vanished from his sight. The sound of its engine, a guttural, primal roar, faded into the distance, leaving only the hollow whine of his own, now inadequate jets. He was left in its wake, alone with the impossible truth. For Elias, the world outside the cockpit was a symphony of raw power and terrifying beauty. The air screamed past the reinforced canopy, a physical force threatening to rip the skin from his bones. The engine vibrated with a furious intensity, a living beast pushing beyond its limits. But it held. Every rivet, every panel, every ounce of the P-51 was screaming, protesting the impossible speed, yet it obeyed his silent command. He was one with the machine, his hands and feet extensions of its will, guiding it through the maelstrom. The ground below was a smeared canvas, the horizon a distant, shimmering blur. He pushed for another minute, perhaps two, holding the unbelievable speed, etching the image of the Me-262 falling behind into his memory, not out of malice, but as proof. Proof that the impossible was just a challenge waiting to be met. The numbers on his custom airspeed indicator were a blur, a testament to a feat no one believed possible for a propeller plane. 720 miles per hour. A P-51 Mustang. It was a defiant whisper against the roar of an era, a thunderous statement that echoed through the very air. Back on the ground, a stunned silence had fallen over the crowd. The initial roar of anticipation had died with the jet's lead, replaced by a collective, breathless gasp as the silver P-51, a ghost from the past, not only caught but surpassed the Me-262. Then, as the P-51 became a distant, triumphant speck against the pale sky, the silence shattered. A wave of sound erupted from the spectators, a raw, primal roar of cheers and shouts that rivaled the engines. People jumped, hugged, pointed, their faces a mixture of disbelief and pure, unadulterated awe. Officials, their faces ashen, stared through binoculars, their meticulously ordered world suddenly turned upside down. The mocking laughter was gone, replaced by a profound, almost reverent quiet in their ranks. They had witnessed history, a defiant refusal to accept limitations. Elias Vance, the stubborn mechanic, had not just built a faster plane. He had tore a hole in the sky and rewritten the rules of what was possible. He didn't linger in the triumph. The P-51, its monstrous engine finally eased back from its screaming peak, began a slow, controlled descent. The furious vibrations lessened. The roar softened to a deep, resonant growl. Elias felt the immense G-forces ease, his vision sharpening as the ground rushed up to meet him. He had pushed the machine and himself to the absolute brink, and now it was time to bring his loyal steed home. The landing gear lowered with a familiar hiss, the wheels locking into place. He lined up with the runway, the airbase, once a stage for his ridicule, now a testament to his victory. The landing was not a flamboyant display, but a meticulous, almost humble descent, a final act of precision from a master craftsman. The tires kissed the asphalt with a gentle squeal, and the P-51 rolled smoothly down the runway, its propellers slowing, becoming distinct blades once more. The sound of the engine, though still potent, was now one of controlled power, of a beast returning to its lair after a triumphant hunt. He taxied back towards his hangar, the cheers of the crowd a distant, almost surreal sound. His victory wasn't for them, not for the headlines, but for the quiet conviction that had fueled him for so long. He cut the engine. The sudden silence was immense, broken only by the ticking of cooling metal and the distant, fading echoes of the crowd's incredulous cheers. Elias unlatched the reinforced canopy, the heavy glass swinging open with a soft sigh, releasing the scent of hot oil and ozone. He pushed himself up, his muscles stiff, his body aching from the violent stresses of the flight. His face, streaked with oil and sweat, bore the marks of his ordeal, but in his eyes there was no exhaustion, no relief, only a profound, quiet satisfaction. He wasn't smiling, but a deep, settled peace radiated from him. As he lowered himself to the tarmac, his feet finding solid ground, the roar of the crowd, which had been a distant hum, began to swell, slowly, then building to a crescendo. They surged forward, a wave of humanity, no longer mocking, no longer skeptical, but utterly, completely awestruck. The sneers and dismissive laughter were gone, replaced by a reverent silence that quickly gave way to a thunderous applause, a recognition of the impossible feat they had just witnessed. This wasn't just about speed. It wasn't about a record, or even about definitively beating a jet. Elias Vance had done more than push a P-51 Mustang to 720 miles per hour. He had redefined the very essence of human ingenuity. In an era where the shiny and new often overshadow the power of meticulous craftsmanship and relentless belief, Elias had proven that true innovation isn't always about abandoning the past, but about reimagining its potential. He stood as a testament to the quiet rebels, the stubborn dreamers who dare to defy conventional wisdom, who pour their lives into projects others dismiss as anachronisms. His victory was a resounding declaration that the human spirit, when fueled by an unshakable conviction, can shatter perceived limits and force the world to reconsider what is truly possible. He reminded us that sometimes the greatest leaps forward come not from the loud proclamations of progress, but from the silent, unwavering dedication of those who simply refuse to give up. The future, he showed us, isn't just a destination. It's a testament to what we build with our hands, our minds, and our hearts, even when everyone else tells us it's impossible. Sometimes the loudest statements are made by the quietest believers, pushing the impossible until the world is forced to listen. Elias Vance didn't just win a race. He ignited a spark, a reminder that the most extraordinary achievements often emerge from the most unexpected places, driven by the sheer will to prove the doubters wrong. If you were inspired by Elias's story, if you believe in the power of relentless innovation and the spirit of defying expectations, then hit that like button. Share this tale of an unsung hero with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories of triumph against all odds.